Hey everyone. Tonight we begin in the dust. A dry wind howls across the steppe, but what it carries isn't just sand, it's memory. Memory of cities that no longer exist, of names spoken only by the dead, of skulls stacked in silence where laughter used to live. You've heard the legends of conquest, of speed, of the man who bent the world. But Genghis Khan wasn't a legend. He was deliberate. Entire civilizations didn't fall beneath his hooves, they were erased. Merv, Nishapur, Samarkand. They didn't burn by accident. They were warnings. Carved into flesh, written in blood, engineered to outlive the bodies they destroyed. This wasn't chaos. This was order, sharpened into terror. He sent no message, only silence, and the silence spread like smoke. So tonight, we won't count the dead. We'll sit with what he left behind. The hush after the massacre, the sound a city makes when no one is left to speak. If dark truths like these help you breathe a little slower, like and subscribe. And tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Then lean back, dim the light, and walk with me into the ash where history doesn't just remember, it recoils. The wind is always there on the steppe. You can feel it now, a constant, low hum across endless grassland that stretches out like a sea of green and gold under a vast, indifferent sky. You are here, standing in the dust, feeling the chill even in the bright sun. This is where it begins. Not with armies or palaces, but with nothing. A boy named Temujin. Imagine the silence here. It's not an empty silence, but one filled with the ancient sounds of the land. The whisper of tall grasses, the distant cry of a hawk circling high above, the shifting sigh of the wind itself. This land shaped him. It is harsh. It demands strength, cunning, and a resilience that goes bone deep. Survival is not given, it is taken, moment by difficult moment. You see the small figures moving in the distance, tiny specks against the immense horizon. These are the nomadic peoples, the Mongols. Their lives are tethered to the rhythm of the seasons, following their herds across this unforgiving landscape. Life is lived in tents, called yurts, pulled down and set up again as they search for pasture. It's a life of constant movement, of close family ties, and of brutal rivalries between clans. Loyalty is paramount, betrayal is death. Now, focus on one small camp. The air here smells of wood smoke, drying meat, and the earthy scent of horses. You might hear the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the playful shouts of children. Though here, the shouts are muted, the play subdued. Something is wrong. A man is gone. Temujin's father, Yasuge, a respected leader, was poisoned by a rival tribe. You watch the boy, Temujin. He is young, maybe 10 years old. His face is smudged with dirt, his eyes watchful, holding a depth that seems too old for him. He doesn't cry, not openly. The steppe teaches you that tears are a luxury you cannot afford. His father's people, fearing retribution or perhaps simply seizing an opportunity, have abandoned his family. His mother, Holun, is left with her children, including Temujin, with almost nothing. No protection, no resources, just the vast, indifferent steppe surrounding them. You feel the gnawing emptiness in your own stomach, mirroring theirs. Food is scarce. They are forced to forage for roots, fish from small streams, hunt small animals. Every day is a struggle against hunger, against the elements, against the ever-present threat of enemies, rival tribes, bandits, even wild animals. You watch Temujin learn to survive. He learns to hunt with deadly precision, to track enemies across miles of open land, to endure hardship that would break others. He sleeps under the stars, the cold seeping into his young bones. But the wind is his constant companion, whispering secrets of survival. He is betrayed again, captured by a former ally of his father's. You can almost feel the ropes binding your own wrists, the fear tightening in your chest. He is put in a wooden collar, a kang, designed to humiliate and control. But even then, something fierce burns within him. He escapes, using the very landscape that shaped him to his advantage. He melts into the night, into the endless grasslands, a ghost in the wind. This isn't just a story of a boy's hard life. It's the foundation of the force that would terrorize continents. This abandonment, this hardship, this constant fight for existence in a land where only the strong and cunning survive. It forged him. It taught him the brutal logic of power, the unforgivable nature of betrayal, and the absolute necessity of loyalty within your own circle. The vastness of the steppe, which can feel isolating and crushing, also grants a kind of limitless perspective, a vision that extends beyond horizons. You feel the dust on your skin, carried by the ceaseless wind. You see the emptiness stretching around you. This is the crucible. This is where the man who would become Genghis Khan, the man who would command the wind and the dust and the fates of millions, was born from the very earth and hardship he was forced to endure. He learned early that the world was a place of brutal indifference, and he resolved to be its master, not its victim. And the first lesson was simple. Rely on no one but your kin, your sworn brothers, and never, ever show weakness. The quiet waiting boy on the steppe, watching the wind, was already planning how to make the world feel the fear he had felt, multiplied 1,000-fold. Now, let the wind carry you away from the lonely steppe, across mountains and vast distances, to a city that stands like a jewel in the desert. Its name is Merv. Imagine it shimmering in the heat, its walls strong, its markets bustling, its gardens green and lush, fed by ancient canals. You can almost smell the spices, hear the murmur of 1,000 conversations in different languages, see the vibrant colors of silks and tiles. This is Merv, a city of the Khwarezmian Empire, a center of trade and learning, home to hundreds of thousands of people living lives as ordinary as yours. The year is 1221. The air in Merv is thick with apprehension. The Mongol army, led by Tolui, son of Genghis Khan, is outside the gates. Rumors have spread like wildfire, rumors of their speed, their ruthlessness, their unstoppable advance. The people of Merv, advised by their leaders, make a choice they believe will save them. They choose surrender, peacefully. You are here, perhaps standing on the ramparts, or maybe within the city square, watching. The gates are opened, not stormed, but opened from within. A delegation of city elders walks out, hands open, signifying submission. The Mongol leaders enter the city. There is no immediate violence, no chaotic charge. There is a chilling stillness. A calm precedes the storm, a silence that feels heavier than any noise. The Mongol commanders give instructions. All the inhabitants are to leave the city, to gather outside the walls, in the open plains, You feel a knot of unease tighten in your chest. Why? But fear is a powerful motivator. They obey. The streets that were moments ago vibrant with life now flow outwards, a river of people, men, women, children, the elderly, leaving behind their homes, their possessions, their entire lives. Trusting in the promise of peaceful surrender, they are led out in groups, organized, efficient. Once they are outside, spread across the plains, under the watchful eyes of thousands of Mongol archers and cavalry, the chilling purpose is revealed. The order is given. The killing begins. But this is not a chaotic frenzy. Remember the calm, calculated nature mentioned earlier. This is its horrifying manifestation. The Mongol soldiers are methodical. The people are divided. The men are separated from the women and children. You might hear the quiet commands given in a language you don't understand. The rustle of movement, the soft thud of arrows, the glint of blades. The men are led away in smaller groups, perhaps 50 here, 100 there, and the work begins. Historical accounts speak of hundreds of thousands led out and systematically executed. Imagine the sheer scale, the logistics of ending so many lives in an organized fashion. It speaks to a chilling efficiency, a dehumanization of the victims. This wasn't war. It was extermination on an industrial scale. Centuries before such horror became commonplace. You see the heads, piles of them, stacks that grow higher as the hours pass, like firewood, a stark, brutal image. The earth drinks the blood silently. The dust rises, settling on everything. A soft, terrible blanket. The air grows heavy, not just with the scent of death, but with an overwhelming silence. The silence of 250,000 voices, perhaps more, extinguished. The women and children, too, are dealt with. Some are killed. Some are taken as slaves or concubines. A few with valuable skills might be spared for forced labor. But the vast majority share the fate of the men. The city that surrendered politely is erased. Walk through the streets of Merv after the Mongols leave. The smell of blood hangs in the air, mingling with the dust. The markets are empty, stalls overturned, homes are ransacked, abandoned. The gardens, once lush, are trampled. The canals run clear. But the memory of what happened here stains the very stones. Merv, the jewel of the desert, has become a tomb. The scale of the massacre at Merv is almost incomprehensible. Some historical estimates place the death toll at over 700,000, though numbers from that era are difficult to verify precisely. Even if the true number was significantly lower, it was a catastrophic loss of life. A deliberate act designed not just to conquer, but to annihilate a population. To send a message echoing across continents: resist and you will be destroyed. Surrender and you might be destroyed anyway. It was a chilling demonstration of power. A calculated act of terror designed to break the will of any who might consider standing in Genghis Khan's path. And you stood there, watching the silent tide of endings, feeling the weight of that terror settle deep within you. Shift your focus now. Drift like the dust motes carried on the wind, towards another great city further west. This is Bukhara, like Merv. It is a city of immense wealth, learning, and culture. Another jewel in the Khwarezmian Empire, a vibrant center along the Silk Road. Its buildings soar towards the sky, intricate tile work glinting in the sun. The air here hums with scholarship, trade, and deep faith. At the heart of Bukhara stands a magnificent mosque. Imagine its cool, hushed interior, high arches, soaring domes, intricate calligraphy adorning the walls. It is a place of peace, reflection, and community prayer. The scent of incense might linger faintly in the air, mingling with the cool stone. You can almost hear the echoes of prayers that have resonated here for centuries. Then, the Mongols arrive. Bukhara, after a brief resistance, falls. The gates are breached, or perhaps opened again, in a last desperate hope for mercy. Chaos might sweep through parts of the city, but then the chilling order returns, and Genghis Khan himself enters Bukhara. He does not go immediately to the palace or the market. He goes to the Grand Mosque. You are there, within the sacred space, watching him enter. He is a figure of power, radiating an aura that commands absolute stillness. His eyes, they say, held a peculiar intensity. He stands before the gathered city elders and prominent citizens who have been brought before him within the mosque. The air is thick with fear, with the unspoken questions of their fate. And then he speaks. His voice might not be loud, but it carries absolute authority in the hushed space. The words are translated, and they land like stones in the stillness. I am the punishment of God. Feel those words resonate. Had you not committed great sins, he continues, his gaze sweeping over the terrified faces, he would not have sent me upon you. It's a chilling statement, delivered with cold conviction. He is not just a conqueror, he is presenting himself as a divine instrument, the hand of God delivering retribution. This wasn't just about territorial conquest. It was about shattering the spiritual and psychological foundations of the conquered people. By claiming divine sanction for his brutality, he sought to break their will, to make them feel not just defeated, but guilty, deserving of their fate. It stripped away their dignity, their righteousness, leaving them with only terror and the crushing weight of what he claimed was divine judgment. After delivering this pronouncement within the sanctuary, Genghis Khan gives further orders. He orders the mosque to be cleared of its sacred objects. Then, he commands that his horses be brought inside. Imagine the scene. Soldiers leading horses into the hushed, holy space. The smell of animal. The sound of hooves on the polished stone floor, echoing where only human steps and whispers of prayer should be heard. The mosque, a place dedicated to the highest spiritual devotion, is deliberately desecrated, turned into a stable. The valuable books and religious texts are carried out, treated as worthless. The grain reserves stored within the city, including some reportedly kept inside the mosque, are distributed to the Mongol soldiers and their horses. You watch, helpless, as this sacred space is defiled. It's a powerful, symbolic act of conquest. It says your God has abandoned you. Your holiest places hold no power against me. I am your new reality. I am the only power now. Following this symbolic desecration, the fate of Bukhara mirrors that of Merv, though perhaps not always on the exact same scale everywhere. The city is plundered. Many are killed. Those deemed useful are enslaved. The vibrant life of Bukhara is extinguished, leaving behind another historical tombstone. The act of turning the Grand Mosque into a stable was more than just practical. It was a profound act of psychological warfare. It attacked the very soul of the city, the faith of its people. It left them not only militarily defeated and physically devastated, but spiritually broken. standing there in the desecrated mosque, breathing the dust stirred by the hooves. You feel the cold, heavy weight of Genghis Khan's message. I am here because your God allowed it, and now, even his house serves my horses. Drift again, like the smoke from distant fires. You arrive at the gates of yet another city. This could be Nishapur or Herat, or any of the countless towns and cities that lay in the path of the Mongol advance across Asia. The air here is thick with tension. Inside the walls, people huddle together, whispering nervously. Outside, the dust rises from the vast encampment of the Mongol army. The Mongol approach was often preceded by envoys, carrying not offers of peace, but ultimatums. And with the ultimatum came a visual signal, a stark, chilling choice presented in the form of flags raised outside the city walls. You stand, perhaps on a high tower, or maybe simply looking towards the gates from within the city, and you see them being raised. 3 flags, simple, yet terrifyingly potent symbols of fate. The first flag is white. It is a flag of surrender. The message is clear: open your gates immediately. Offer no resistance, and perhaps, just perhaps, your lives will be spared. Your city will be plundered, your wealth taken, your leaders replaced. But the people might live. It is a gamble, a desperate hope offered in the face of overwhelming power. The second flag is red. This flag means resistance, defiance, even if only a token show of force. The consequence is equally clear if you raise the red flag or if you resist in any way. When the city falls, and it will fall, the men of the city will be put to the sword. Only the women and children might be spared, for purposes of enslavement or other fates. It is a promise of partial, but still immense, destruction. The third flag is black. This is the flag of absolute, unyielding defiance. Perhaps the city has killed a Mongol envoy, or resisted fiercely, or holds particular strategic or personal importance to Khan. The black flag carries a simple, terrible message. Total destruction. Men, women, children, animals, all will be killed. The city will be burned to the ground, its walls torn down, its wells poisoned or filled in, ensuring that nothing remains. It is a promise of annihilation. You stand there, watching the flags flutter gently in the wind, and you feel the cold dread creep into your soul. The leaders within the city deliberate frantically. White-red, what to do? They look at their strong walls, their soldiers, their people. Can they resist? Do they have a chance? Or is surrender the only path, however uncertain? Many cities tried to gamble. They saw the Mongol army, knew the stories. But perhaps they believed their walls were strong enough, their defenders brave enough. Or maybe they couldn't bear the thought of simply opening their gates and trusting the word of such a brutal force. They chose red, hoping to fight and somehow prevail, or at least die fighting. And history tells us plainly, most cities lost. The Mongol military machine was unlike anything the world had seen. Their speed, their discipline, their mastery of siege warfare, they were relentless. Walls that had stood for centuries crumbled under their bombardment. Armies that outnumbered them were outmaneuvered and routed. So you watch, whether from inside or outside, as the choice is made. Perhaps the white flag is raised, and the people wait with bated breath, only for the surrender to unfold into the systematic horror witnessed at Merv. Perhaps the red flag flies proudly for a time, followed by the terrible sounds of a siege, the eventual breach, and the selective slaughter. Or perhaps the black flag is hoisted in a final act of defiance, sealing the fate of everyone and everything within the walls, leading to utter devastation where only rubble and silence remain. The chilling genius of the three flags was that the choice was often an illusion. The real message was the inevitability of Mongol power and the predetermined consequences of your reaction to it. Resistance led to guaranteed catastrophe. Surrender offered only a slim, unreliable hope against a conqueror who frequently broke his promises of mercy once the gates were opened. It was a psychological trap, designed to instill terror and division even before the first arrow was fired. You feel the weight of that impossible choice, the chilling realization that for many, there was no right answer, only different paths to destruction or enslavement under the gaze of the fluttering, silent flags. Drift further west now, following the path of conquest, across the vast, dry lands, towards a city that was, for centuries, the beating heart of the Islamic world. A center of unparalleled knowledge, beauty, and power. This is Baghdad. Imagine it in its prime. The House of Wisdom bustling with scholars from across the known world. The city adorned with magnificent palaces, mosques, and libraries. The Tigris River flowing through its heart like a lifeline. Its banks lined with markets and gardens. The air here would have smelled of ink, perfume, spices, and the sweet scent of paper. This was the zenith of the Islamic Golden Age. The year is 1258, though Genghis Khan himself is long dead by this point. His empire now ruled by his grandson, Hulagu. The Mongol armies arrive outside Baghdad's walls. The city is still immense, but perhaps its power has waned slightly. Yet, it remains a symbol of cultural and intellectual achievement. Baghdad makes its stand, its caliph believing his city is impregnable, or perhaps underestimating the relentless nature of the Mongol siege. The siege is fierce, for days, for weeks. The city endures. The sounds of bombardment fill the air. You can imagine the dust rising, the fear gripping the inhabitants. Then, the walls are breached. Or perhaps the caliph, after realizing the futility of resistance, attempts to negotiate. Either way, the Mongols enter the city, and the true horror begins, not just for the people, but for the legacy of human knowledge. The libraries of Baghdad were legendary. They held countless volumes of ancient texts, scientific treatises, philosophical works, poetry, history, collected and translated over centuries. Imagine rooms filled floor to ceiling with scrolls and books, written in various languages, representing the accumulated wisdom of civilizations. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a library, it was an academy, a place where scholars from diverse backgrounds gathered to study, debate, and translate. It was a living repository of human thought. The Mongols, often portrayed as practical and less concerned with abstract learning compared to practical skills, saw these libraries differently, not as treasures of knowledge, but as collections of paper and parchment. Perhaps fuel, perhaps simply obstacles to clearing space. The order was given. You witness it, or perhaps feel it as a profound ache in the air. The books are carried out of the libraries. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of volumes. Imagine the sheer number. They are brought to the banks of the Tigris River, and they are thrown into the water. You hear the splashes, a quiet, horrifying sound repeated endlessly. Scroll after scroll, bound volume after bound volume, tossed into the flowing river. as more and more books are submerged. The ink from the ancient texts dissolves, bleeding into the water. The water's turned black. Imagine the Tigris, the very river that sustained Baghdad, now running dark, thick with the ink of destroyed knowledge. It's a powerful, terrible image. It symbolizes not just the loss of physical objects, but the deliberate drowning of centuries of human intellectual effort. Think of the countless hours of study, translation, writing, and debate represented by those books, lost irretrievably. This wasn't just incidental damage of war. It was a focused destruction of culture, of history, of science. Alongside the libraries, hospitals were flattened, scholars were slaughtered, their knowledge perishing with them. The irrigation systems that fed the gardens and fields around the city, the very infrastructure that supported its life, were destroyed or allowed to fall into disrepair. The destruction of Baghdad, and especially its libraries, is seen by many historians as a pivotal moment, marking the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The light of learning that had shone so brightly from this city was deliberately extinguished. You feel the chill of that loss, the sense of something precious and irreplaceable being swept away by the dark tide of the river. The smell of burning might mingle with the scent of the inky water. You stand on the banks of the Tigris, watching the black tide flow, a silent testament to the deliberate annihilation of not just a city, but an era of human progress. Move now to the final moments before the fall of Baghdad. The siege is over, or perhaps the city has decided to surrender. The caliph, the spiritual and temporal leader of the Islamic world, a figure of immense authority and respect, is brought before the Mongol commander, Hulagu, or perhaps one of his top generals. Imagine the scene. The caliph, dressed in the finest robes, surrounded by his remaining courtiers, perhaps with a bearing of dignity despite the dire circumstances. He walks towards the Mongol leader, who is seated, perhaps on a simple stool, surrounded by his rough-clothed soldiers. The contrast is stark, the refined descendant of the Prophet Muhammad facing the descendant of the steppe warlord. The caliph, trusting in ancient customs of diplomacy or perhaps simply hoping to appeal to some sense of honor, offers a gesture of welcome or submission. But Mongol customs are different, brutal and practical. They had little regard for the established hierarchies and rituals of the settled civilizations they conquered. The Mongols had a particular belief regarding royalty. They believed that royal blood should not touch the earth. To spill the blood of a king or emperor directly onto the ground was considered improper, perhaps even sacrilegious in their own nomadic belief system, or maybe simply bad luck. This strange custom dictated the manner in which they executed captured royalty. So, when the Caliph of Baghdad was captured, his fate was sealed. But the method was dictated by this peculiar belief. He was not beheaded with a sword, not shot with an arrow, not openly butchered. Instead, he was wrapped in a rug, a fine carpet, perhaps one of the many treasures taken from his palace or the city. You can almost feel the rough texture of the wool, the intricate patterns of the fabric as it is wound around him, wrapped tightly, perhaps like a package, concealing him from view, ensuring that his royal blood, if it were to be spilled by internal injury, would be contained within the fibers of the carpet, never touching the sacred ground. And then, the carpet-wrapped caliph was placed on the ground, and the Mongol soldiers brought their horses. Imagine the sound, muffled but terrifying. The snorting of the animals, the heavy thudding of hooves. The horses were ridden back and forth over the spot where the caliph lay. bound and wrapped within the rug, again and again. You hear the sickening sounds. Or perhaps you turn away, unable to watch. But the sounds penetrate the silence, the weight of the horses, pounding down repeatedly, crushing the life from the man within the rug. It is a death designed to be indirect, ritualistic, yet utterly brutal, a death stripped of any dignity, reduced to a muffled, trampled end. This act served multiple purposes. It adhered to their strange belief about royal blood. It was a profound humiliation of the conquered leader, a public spectacle of his helplessness. It was a chilling display of cold, calculated cruelty, delivered not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet aftermath. A final, terrible punctuation mark on the fall of the city. Justice. Some might call it Mongol style. But it was not justice. It was a demonstration that even the highest figures of their enemies meant nothing, could be disposed of in the most demeaning and physically agonizing ways, simply to satisfy a strange custom and instill ultimate terror. You hear the distant, rhythmic pounding, the final silence after the horses are led away. And you feel the profound unease of power so absolute it dictates even the ritual of death. The dust settles. The fires, if there were any, die down to embers. The killing might subside. The initial wave of violence passing over the conquered city or region like a terrible flood. But the aftermath of a Mongol conquest was not simply emptiness. Life, in a brutalized form, continued for those who survived the initial onslaught. You walk through the remnants of a city, or perhaps observe a large gathering of captives in an open field outside the walls. The air is heavy with the smell of smoke, ruin, and fear. People are being sorted. It's a process as cold and efficient as the killing that preceded it. The Mongols weren't just destroyers. They were also practical empire builders, extracting resources and manpower from their conquests. Look at the faces of the survivors. Exhausted, terrified, defeated. They stand or sit, waiting to be judged, categorized, assigned a fate by their new masters. And that fate depends entirely on what you possess that the Mongols deem valuable. If you had skills, they kept you. Were you a craftsman, a blacksmith capable of forging weapons, a mason who could build fortifications or siege engines, a weaver who could produce fine textiles, a physician, an engineer? If your hands held knowledge, if you could make things the Mongols needed for their armies or their growing empire, you were valuable. You would be spared the general slaughter, but you would be enslaved, forcibly resettled, perhaps transported thousands of miles across the vast Mongol Empire to labor in distant workshops or cities. Your skill was your life token, but it came at the cost of your freedom and your home. You watch as those with calloused hands or intelligent eyes are pulled aside, separated from their families, marked for forced service. If you were beautiful, they gifted you. Women, particularly young and attractive women, were taken, not necessarily as laborers, but as concubines, wives, or simply spoils of war. They might be taken by Mongol soldiers, officers, or even sent back to the Mongol heartland as gifts to commanders or members of the royal family. You see the fear in the eyes of the young women, the despair of their parents or husbands as they are led away. Their beauty, which might have been cherished in their former lives, becomes their curse, marking them for a future they did not choose, far from everything they knew. If you were lucky, you pulled a cart. For many of the survivors, especially men and women who didn't possess specialized skills or particular beauty. The fate was forced labor. They were put to work rebuilding roads, digging canals, tending fields, or most famously, serving in the logistical train of the Mongol army. This often meant pulling the carts that carried supplies, weapons, and plunder across vast distances. It was backbreaking, relentless work, often with little food or rest. You see the lines of exhausted people, yoked like animals to heavy carts, shuffling forward under the watchful eyes of Mongol guards. This was a kind of slow, grinding survival, day after day of physical misery. And if you were unlucky, well, the Mongol army needed meat shields. This is one of the most brutal and cynical uses of conquered people. During sieges, particularly against fortified cities, the Mongols would often drive the captured inhabitants ahead of their own troops. Forced to march in the vanguard, they were used to fill in ditches, clear obstacles, or simply absorb the arrows and projectiles fired from the city walls, protecting the Mongol soldiers behind them. You cannot imagine the sheer terror of being forced towards your own people, towards the defenses designed to protect you, knowing you are nothing but expendable human fodder. You see the desperation, the futility, the absolute horror of this fate. Your heart sinks, feeling the chilling emptiness of being used as a shield. So, after the conquest, after the pyramids of heads and the burned libraries, there was this cold sorting. People reduced to their utility, their bodies, their skills. Families shattered, individuals dispersed across an empire built on their suffering. You stand among them, feeling the weight of their collective loss, the quiet resignation of those whose lives have been utterly redefined by the brutal hand of the conqueror. Survival came at a terrible price, a price paid in freedom, dignity, and the forced erasure of who you once were. Let the wind carry you one last time, further east still, into the vast and ancient land of China. You arrive at the walls of a magnificent city. This is Kaifeng, the capital of the Jin dynasty, a city of immense scale, power, and sophistication. Imagine its towering walls, built of earth and stone, stretching for miles, a formidable barrier. Inside, the city is a marvel. Bustling markets, beautiful temples and palaces, intricate canals, and millions of inhabitants living lives of refinement and complexity. The air here would smell of tea, silk, paper, and perhaps the distant scent of coal smoke. Kaifeng stood proud. It represented the long tradition and power of Chinese civilization, a stark contrast to the nomadic empire that had risen from the north. Its leaders believed its defenses were impregnable, its resources inexhaustible. They prepared for a siege, confident they could withstand the Mongol storm. And a siege came. Not a swift, sudden strike like at Merv or Bukhara, but a grinding, relentless operation that stretched on for months. The Mongol army, led by Ogodei, son of Genghis Khan, surrounded the city. They used siege engines brought from Persia and China itself, demonstrating their ability to adapt and incorporate the technologies of those they conquered. You are within the city walls now, experiencing the slow agony of the siege. The initial fear gives way to a weary endurance. You hear the constant sound of bombardment against the walls, the occasional collapse of a section. You see the Mongol camps stretched out across the horizon, a seemingly endless presence. As the months drag on, the air inside the city changes. The markets become emptier. Food grows scarce. Hunger becomes a constant, gnawing ache. You see the faces of the people grow thinner, their movements slower. Disease begins to spread through the crowded city, preying on the weakened population. Sickness joins hunger as silent killers. Hope flickers and fades. Reinforcements are promised but fail to arrive. Internal strife might add to the misery, betrayal compounding the external threat. You feel the growing despair, the sense of being trapped, slowly suffocated by the relentless pressure outside the walls. The once proud city becomes a cage of suffering. The Mongols, true to form, weren't above psychological tactics, even during a long siege. They might divert rivers, flood areas, send diseased captives back into the city. They demonstrated an unwavering resolve, the chilling certainty that they could wait, and you could only starve and suffer. Finally, after months of agonizing struggle, the walls break. Or perhaps, once again, the leadership surrenders, recognizing the bitter end has arrived. The Mongol soldiers pour into the city. What follows is the predictable, yet still horrifying, pattern of Mongol conquest. The initial fury might be terrible after such a long resistance. The ruling elite, the princes and high officials, are typically executed, their power extinguished utterly. The vast population faces the familiar sorting process. Mass slaughter might occur in certain areas, those with skills, those who might be useful for labor or other purposes, are rounded up and enslaved. The city is plundered, its treasures carried away. But the devastation in Kaifeng was not just physical. The sheer length of the siege, the depth of the suffering endured by its inhabitants, left scars that went beyond shattered walls and emptied buildings. The city's spirit was broken, its population decimated, its systems of life disrupted. It never truly recovered its former glory, its vibrant energy. It never truly breathed again. You stand in the ruined streets, breathing the dust that hangs in the air, smelling the lingering scent of suffering and loss. The silence after the storm is profound. The great city of Kaifeng, which had stood so proud, was brought low by a combination of brute force, strategic patience, and the systematic application of terror and deprivation. You feel the echoes of the long struggle, the slow decline, the final, brutal end, and the quiet emptiness that remained where millions once lived. It is a somber end to the tale of a once glorious city, now just another name whispered on the wind, a testament to the terrible cost of standing in the path of Genghis Khan and the empire he forged through blood and calculated fear. World War I saw the first large-scale use of chemical weapons, marking a grim chapter in Millet history. The introduction of poison gas changed the nature of warfare, causing immense suffering and reshaping. Battlefield tactics. This part explores the types of chemical weapons used, their effects, defensive measures, and the long-term consequences of chemical warfare in World War I. The development and use of chemical weapons. Chemical warfare emerged as an attempt to break the stalemate of trench warfare, forcing enemy troops out of defensive positions. The first use of poison gas. The first large-scale use of poison gas occurred on April 22, 1915, during the Second Battle of Arras. The German army released chlorine gas, causing mass panic and devastation among unprepared Allied troops. Types of chemical weapons. Several types of chemical agents were deployed during the war. Chlorine gas, a choking agent that caused severe respiratory damage, FOS. Gene gas, more potent than chlorine, leading to delayed but fatal effects. Mustard gas, one of the most feared agents, causing severe burns, blindness, and long-term health complications. The impact of chemical warfare. The use of chemical weapons had both immediate and long-term effects on soldiers and civilians alike. Battlefield casualties and psychological impact. Thousands of soldiers suffered agonizing deaths or long-term injuries. Due to chemical exposure, survivors often endured chronic respiratory diseases, blindness, and psychological trauma. Tactical influence, chemical weapons forced armies to develop new defensive strategies, including the widespread use of gas masks and protective gear. However, their unpredictable nature and reliance on wind direction often backfired, harming the attacking forces as well. Defensive measures and countermeasures as chemical attacks became more common. Militaries adapted their tactics to counteract their effects. Gas masks and protective gear. Gas masks were quickly developed to protect soldiers from inhaling toxic gases. Early versions were crude, but advancements improved their effectiveness over time. Training and awareness. Troops received training to recognize gas attacks and respond promptly by using protective equipment and evacuating affected areas. The aftermath and legacy of chemical warfare. The horrific effects of chemical warfare led to widespread condemnation and efforts to ban its use, post-war treaties and bans. In 1925, the Geneva Protocol was signed, prohibiting the use of chemical and biological weapons in warfare. However, chemical weapons continued to be developed and used in later conflicts. The ethical and medical legacy. The medical community made advancements in treating chemical exposure, and public awareness of the inhumane nature of chemical warfare grew. The war's legacy influenced modern conventions on warfare ethics and international law. Chemical warfare in World War I introduced a new terrifying dimension to combat, while it failed to provide a decisive advantage. Its devastating effects left a lasting impact on military strategy and international law. The lessons learned from its use led to stronger regulations against chemical weapons. Though their presence in modern conflicts remains a global concern, World War I was a global conflict that relied heavily on the participation of colonial troops from Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. Millions of soldiers from colonies fought alongside European forces, playing a critical role in the war effort despite their contributions. These troops often faced discrimination, harsh conditions, and a lack of recognition. This part explores the role of colonial troops in World War I, their experiences, and the long-term impact of their service. Recruitment and mobilization. Colonial troops were recruited through various means, including voluntary enlistment, conscription, and forced labor. Many colonial powers, including Britain, France, and Germany, drew heavily from their overseas territories, British and French. Colonial forces, British Empire. The British recruited soldiers from India, Africa, the Caribbean, and other colonies. The Indian Army, in particular, provided over 1 million troops serving in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. French Empire. France relied on troops from North and West Africa, Indochina, and Madagascar. The Tiers Seal were among the most notable colonial regiments fighting on the Western Front, German and other colonial forces. Germany, though possessing fewer colonies, also recruited troops from its African territories, particularly in East Africa, where African soldiers played a key role in guerrilla warfare against the Allies. The role of colonial troops in combat. Colonial troops were deployed in various theaters of war, often placed in some of the most dangerous conditions. Fighting on the Western Front, many colonial troops fought in brutal trench warfare in Europe. They were often used in high-risk assaults, suffering heavy casualties while demonstrating great bravery and resilience. Campaigns in Africa and the Middle East. Africa and German East Africa, African soldiers played a significant role in the war, engaging in long, grueling campaigns under difficult conditions. Middle East Indian and North African troops were vital in the British campaigns in Mesopotamia, Iraq, and Palestine, where they fought against Ottoman forces, challenges, and discrimination despite their contributions. Colonial troops faced numerous challenges, including racism, poor treatment, and inadequate recognition. Racial discrimination. Colonial troops were often treated as second-class soldiers, receiving lower pay, poorer equipment, and inadequate medical care compared to European troops. In many cases, they were given the most dangerous assignments with little regard for their lives. Difficult living and working conditions. Many colonial soldiers faced extreme weather disease and malnutrition while serving in unfamiliar territories. Those who served in Europe were often unprepared for the harsh winters leading to significant hardships, post-war impact, and legacy. The experiences of colonial troops during World War I had lasting political and social effects in their home countries. Push for independence movements. The war experience fueled nationalist movements across the colonies. Many returning soldiers questioned European superiority and began advocating for independence and self-determination, lack of recognition despite their sacrifices. Many colonial veterans were denied the same rights and benefits as European soldiers. Their contributions were often overlooked in historical narratives. Though efforts have been made in recent years to acknowledge their role, colonial troops played a crucial role in World War I, fighting bravely and enduring immense hardships. Their service was instrumental in the war's outcome. Yet they faced discrimination and limited recognition. The legacy of their involvement contributed to the rise of independence movements and a re-evaluation of colonial rule understanding. Their sacrifices sheds light on the broader impact of World War I beyond Europe, emphasizing its truly global nature. The war at sea played a crucial role in World War I, influencing both military strategies and the broader geopolitical landscape. The conflict saw major naval battles, the use of advanced warships, and the introduction of unrestricted submarine warfare, particularly by German OTS. The struggle for control of the seas impacted supply lines, trade routes, and ultimately, the war outcome. This part explores the role of naval power during World War I, the significance of UOTS, key naval battles, and the long-term consequences of maritime warfare. The role of naval power in World War I. Naval forces were essential to the war effort, used to control trade routes, blockade enemy ports, and support land operations. The British Royal Navy and the German Imperial Navy. British Royal Navy, the largest and most powerful navy at the time. Britain used its fleet to blockade Germany, preventing vital supplies from reaching its military and civilian population. German Imperial Navy Germany sought to challenge British naval dominance by building a strong fleet and using submarines to disrupt Allied shipping naval blockades and economic warfare. The British naval blockade severely restricted Germany's ability to import food and raw materials, contributing to widespread shortages and economic difficulties. In response, Germany relied on submarine warfare to counter British control of the seas. The role of U-boats in World War I. German U-boats UNSE Bute became one of the most formidable threats to Allied naval forces and merchant shipping. Unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany launched a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, targeting both military and civilian vessels. U-boats sank numerous Allied ships, including supply convoys. In an effort to weaken Britain's war effort, the sinking of the Lusitania, one of the most infamous events of the war at sea, occurred on May 7, 1915, when a German U-boat sank, the RMS Lusitania, a British passenger liner. The attack resulted in the deaths of 198 people, including 128 Americans, which fueled anti-German sentiment and contributed to the United States' eventual entry into the war. Major naval battles. Naval battles played a significant role in shaping the conflict, with major engagements between the British and German fleets. The Battle of Jutland, 1916. The largest naval battle of World War I, fought between the British Royal Navy and the German Imperial Navies in the North Sea, while both sides claimed victory. The battle reinforced British naval superiority, preventing Germany from challenging British control of the seas. The Battle of the Falkland Islands, 1914. A decisive British victory against the German East Asia Squadron in the South Atlantic. This battle effectively ended Germany's naval presence in the region and demonstrated Britain's global naval dominance. The impact and legacy of the war at sea naval warfare in World War I had long-term consequences for military strategy and international relations, the role of convoys to counter the U-boat threat the Allies developed. The convoy system grouping merchant ships with armed escorts to reduce losses. This strategy proved effective and was widely used in future conflicts. Technological advancements. World War I saw significant advancements in naval technology, including improved submarines, aircraft carriers, and sonar detection systems. These innovations shaped naval warfare in World War II. And beyond the war at sea was a critical aspect of World War I, shaping the course of the conflict through naval Block S U-boat warfare and major battles. The strategic use of naval power influenced global trade, military tactics, and international politics. The lessons learned from World War I's naval campaigns continued to impact maritime warfare throughout the 20th century, highlighting the enduring importance of naval superiority in global conflicts. The Armenian genocide, which took place during World War I, was one of the most tragic and controversial events of the early 20th century, carried out by the Ottoman Empire between 1915 and 1917. The genocide led to the deaths of an estimated 1.5 million Armenians. The systematic mass killings, forced deportations, and atrocities committed against the Armenian population had a lasting impact on global human rights discourse. This part explores the causes, key events, international response, and long-term consequences of the Armenian genocide, historical background, and causes. The Armenian people had lived under Ottoman rule for centuries. But rising nationalist tensions and the empire's decline led to increasing persecution. The decline of the Ottoman Empire by the early 20th century. The Ottoman Empire was weakening, losing territories and influence. The ruling Committee of Union and Progress Cup, also known as the Young Turks, sought to consolidate power and viewed Christian Armenians with suspicion, fearing that they might support Russia. The Ottoman Empire's enemy, nationalism and ethnic tensions. As nationalist movements grew across the empire, Armenians demanded greater rights and autonomy. The Ottoman government, fearing Armenian loyalty to Russia, began targeting the Armenian population as potential traitors. The beginning of the genocide. The Armenian genocide officially began on April 24, 1915, when Ottoman authorities arrested and executed hundreds of Armenian intellectuals and leaders in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. This marked the start of a systematic campaign to eliminate the Armenian population. Mass deportations and death marches. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians were forcibly removed from their homes and sent on death marches into the Syrian desert. Many perished from starvation, exhaustion, and exposure, while others were subjected to brutal executions along the way. Massacres and atroides, in addition to forced deportations. Armenian men, women, and children were massacred in mass killings, orchestrated by Ottoman military forces and local militias. Reports from survivors and foreign diplomats described horrific acts of violence, including systematic executions, sexual violence, and destruction of Armenia. Cultural heritage. International response and aftermath. Despite reports of mass killings, the international response to the Armenian genocide was limited during the war. Western reactions countries, such as the United States, Britain, and France, condemned the atrocities, but their focus remained on the broader war effort. Some humanitarian aid efforts were organized, but there was no direct military intervention to stop the genocide. The Ottoman government's denial after the war. The Ottoman leadership responsible for the genocide fled or were tried. In absentia, however, subsequent Turkish governments have denied that the events constitute a genocide, arguing that the deaths occurred during wartime conflict rather than as part of a planned extermination campaign. Legacy and recognition. The Armenian genocide remains a highly debated historical event with lasting implications for international law and human rights. Impact on international law. The atrocities committed during the Armenian genocide influenced the development of the term genocide and later international human rights laws. The lessons from the genocide helped shape the 1948 Genocide Convention, which sought to prevent similar atrocities in the future, ongoing recognition and controversy. While many countries, including the United States, France, and Germany, officially recognize the Armenian genocide, Turkey continues to reject the term genocide in reference to these events. This ongoing debate has strained diplomatic relations between Turkey and Armenia, as well as other nations advocating for historical recognition. The Armenian genocide was one of the darkest chapters of World War I, demonstrating the devastating consequences of ethnic persecution and mass violence, despite continued denial by some parties. Historical evidence overwhelmingly supports the classification of the events as genocide. Recognizing and remembering the Armenian genocide remains crucial to ensuring justice, promoting human rights, and preventing future atrocities on a global scale. World War I marked the dawn of modern aerial combat. Initially used for reconnaissance aircraft, soon became integral to the war effort, leading to the rise of fighter pilots and the development of air combat tactics. Aerial warfare introduced new technological advancements and changed military strategy, making air superiority a crucial element in warfare. This part explores the evolution of aerial combat, the role of fighter pilots, key battles, and the lasting impact of World War I on aviation. The early role of aircraft in World War I. When World War I began in 1914, aircraft were primarily used for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Reconnaissance and surveillance planes were used to scout enemy positions, directing artillery fire and mapping troop movements. Their ability to provide real-time intelligence made them invaluable for both sides. The shift to combat, as opposing forces recognized the strategic importance of aircraft, pilots began engaging in air-to-air combat. Initially, pilots fired pistols and rifles at enemy planes. But technological advancements led to the introduction of mounted machine guns, revolutionizing air combat. The emergence of fighter pilots and aces. The rise of fighter pilots gave birth to a new breed of military hero, the flying ace. The first dogfighting emerged as pilots sought to gain air superiority. These intense aerial duels required precision maneuverability and skill, leading to the development of specialized fighter aircraft, famous fighter aces. Manfred von Arhofen, the Red Baron, Germany's most famous ace, credited with 80 aerial victories. René Funk, France's top ace, with 75 confirmed kills. Eddie Rickenbacker, the United States' leading ace, achieving 26 aerial victories. Albert Ball, a British pilot, known for his fearless tactics, and 44 victories. Technological advancements in aerial warfare. The rapid development of aviation technology during World War I played a crucial role in shaping area combat. The development of fighter aircrafts, such as the SOP, with Camel-Fokker Dr. I, and SPAD III were designed specifically for air combat, with enhanced speed, agility, and firepower. The synchronization gear. The introduction of the synchronization gear allowed machine guns to fire through the spinning propeller without damaging it, giving pilots a significant advantage in dogfights. Strategic bombing and air raids bombing missions became an essential part of aerial warfare aircraft. Like the German Gotha bombers and the British Handley Page bombers, were used to attack enemy cities and infrastructure, introducing the concept of strategic bombing. Key aerial battle and their impact. Several significant aerial battles and campaigns demonstrated the growing importance of air power. The Battle of Verdun, 1916. The extensive use of aircraft in reconnaissance and dogfights played a key role in one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war. The Battle of the S, 1916, air superiority, became a crucial factor, with both sides using aircraft to support ground offensives and conduct bombing raids. The Spring Offensive, 1918. By the final year of the war, air forces had evolved into highly organized units with coordinated attacks involving bombers and fighter escorts. The legacy of aerial warfare in World War I. The experiences and innovations of World War I had a lasting impact on military aviation, Influence on future wars. The success of air combat and bombing campaigns demonstrated the importance of air power, influencing the development of air forces in World War II to and beyond the birth of the Air Force. Many nations recognized the strategic significance of air superiority, leading to the establishment of independent air forces such as the Royal Air Force, RAF in Britain in 1918. Aerial warfare in World War I transformed military strategy, introducing new combat tactics and technological innovations, the rise of fighter pilots, the development of advanced aircraft, and the strategic use of air power set the foundation for modern aerial combat. The legacy of World War I. Aviation continues to shape the role of air forces in contemporary military conflicts. World War I dramatically altered the political and social landscape of the Middle East. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the redrawing of borders, and the rise of nationalist movements transformed the region in ways that continue to influence global politics today. This part explores the impact of World War I on the Middle East, focusing on the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the Balfour Declaration, and the emergence of new states. The fall of the Ottoman Empire before World War I. The Ottoman Empire controlled vast territories in the Middle East, but its participation in the war led to its eventual disintegration. Ottoman involvement in World War I. The Ottoman Empire entered the war in 1914 as part of the Central Powers fighting against the British, French, and Russian forces. The empire faced significant military defeats, including the loss of Baghdad and Jerusalem to British forces. The Arab Revolt, 1916 to 1918, encouraged by British promises of independence. Arab nationalists, led by figures like Sharif Hussein and T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, launched the Arab Revolt against Ottoman rule. This revolt contributed to the weakening of Ottoman control in the region. The Sykes-Picot Agreement and the division of the Middle East during the war. Britain and France secretly negotiated the Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1916, which divided the Middle East into spheres of influence. The secret agreement, France was allocated control over Syria and Lebanon. Britain was given influence over Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine. Russia was promised control over parts of eastern Anatolia. Consequences of the agreement. The agreement ignored Arab aspirations for independence, leading to deep resentment and mistrust. It set the stage for future conflicts over territorial control and colonial rule. The Balfour Declaration and its impact. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, stating its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Zionism and the British promise. The declaration was influenced by the growing Zionist movement and British strategic interests in the region. However, it conflicted with British commitments to Arab leaders, creating long-term tensions, growing conflicts in Palestine. The Balfour Declaration fueled tensions between Jewish and Arab communities in Palestine, laying the foundation for future disputes over land and national identity. The emergence of new states. The end of the war saw the creation of new states under European mandates, replacing Ottoman rule with colonial administration, the Treaty of SRA, and the redrawing of borders in 1920. The Treaty of Sa-Forlì dismantled the Ottoman Empire. New states were established under British and French mandates, including Iraq, British mandate, Palestine, British mandate, transit. Jordan, British mandate, Syria, French mandate, Lebanon, French mandate. The rise of nationalist movements. Local populations resisted European control, leading to nationalist movements in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. These movements sought independence and self-rule, setting the stage for later conflicts and the eventual decolonization of the region. Long-term consequences of World War I. The Middle East. The aftermath of World War I had lasting effects on the Middle East, shaping modern political and social dynamics, ongoing conflicts, and borders disputes. The artificial borders drawn by colonial powers contributed to regional instability and territorial disputes that persist to this day. The foundation for future wars. the unresolved issues stemming from World War I, including disputes over Palestine. The rise of nationalism and European intervention played a key role in the conflicts that followed, including the Arab-Israeli conflicts and broader Middle Eastern tensions. World War I reshaped the Middle East by dismantling the Ottoman Empire, imposing colonial rule and fostering nationalist movements. The consequences of these changes continue to influence the region's political landscape. The decisions made during and after the war set the stage for many of the conflicts and tensions that define the Middle East. Today, World War I was a turning point in the history of medicine, leading to significant advancements in medical practices, surgical techniques, and healthcare systems. The war created new challenges that required rapid medical innovations, from treating battlefield injuries to managing widespread diseases. These developments not only saved countless lives during the war, but also laid the foundation for modern medical practices. This part explores the impact of World War I on medicine, focusing on advancements in surgery, the treatment of infections, mental health, and the evolution of medical infrastructure, advancements in surgery and trauma care, the large-scale injury suffered by soldiers required medical professionals to develop new surgical techniques, and improv trauma care development of battlefield surgery surgeons faced unprecedented challenges in treating injuries caused by high-velocity bullets, shrapnel, and explosions. The introduction of mobile field hospitals and advanced surgical techniques, such as debridement, removal of infected tissue, improved survival rates among wounded soldiers. The use of blood transfusions, one of the most significant medical advancements during World War I, was the development of blood transfusion techniques. The use of anticoagulants like sodium citrate allowed blood to be stored and transported, enabling field hospitals to perform life-saving transfusions more effectively. The treatment of infections and disease. The war highlighted the need for better infection control and disease management, leading to critical medical breakthroughs. The introduction of antiseptics and aseptic techniques doctors implemented. Antiseptic practices, such as using Carol-Dewin solution, a mixture of sodium hypochlorite and boric acid, to prevent infection in wounds. These methods significantly reduced mortality rates from sepsis and gangrene innovations. In disease prevention, trench warfare created an environment where diseases such as typhoid dysentery and trench fever spread rapidly. Improved sanitation vaccines and public health measures helped reduce outbreaks and paved the way for better disease management in civilian medicine. Psychological impact and mental health treatment. World War I led to increased awareness of mental health issues, particularly in relation to combat stress. The recognition of shell shock, the psychological trauma experienced by soldiers known as shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, became a major concern. Military psychiatrists began studying combat-related trauma, leading to the development of early forms of psychological treatment and rehabilitation for affected soldiers. Advances in psychiatry. The war prompted significant growth in psychiatric medicine, influencing how mental health disorders were diagnosed and treated in both military and civilian populations. Evolution of medical infrastructure. The war led to improvements in medical logistics and infrastructure influencing healthcare systems worldwide. The expansion of nursing and medical personnel. Women played a critical role in wartime medicine with organizations such as the Red Cross and the Voluntary Aid Detachments, VADs, providing essential medical support. Their contributions helped shape the future role of women in medicine development, of ambulances, and emergency transport. The need for rapid evacuation of the wounded led to the widespread use of motorized ambulances and better coordination of medical transport systems, setting the stage for modern emergency medical services (EMS) long-term impact on modern medicine. The medical advancements made during World War I had lasting effects that continue to shape healthcare today. Influence on surgical techniques. Many of the surgical innovations developed during the war, such as reconstructive surgery and wound management, became standard medical practices in peacetime hospitals. Advancements in public health. The war emphasized the importance of disease prevention, sanitation, and vaccination programs, leading to improvements in global public health initiatives. World War I was a catalyst for medical innovation, prompting advancements in surgery, infection control, mental health treatment, and medical infrastructure. The lessons learned during the war laid the groundwork for modern medicine, demonstrating how conflict can drive progress in health care. The impact of these medical breakthroughs continues to benefit societies worldwide, highlighting the enduring legacy of World War I in the field of medicine. World War I had a profound psychological impact on the soldiers who experienced the horrors of trench warfare. Unprecedented scale of death, destruction, and prolonged exposure to combat led to widespread mental health issues among military personnel. One of the most well-documented conditions that emerged during the war was shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. This part explores the causes, symptoms, treatments, and long-term effects of shell shock, highlighting its impact on medical and military understanding of psychological trauma, causes and symptoms of shell shock. The relentless nature of trench warfare, combined with exposure to artillery bombardments, gas attacks, and hand-to-hand combat, created immense psychological stress. The role of prolonged combat exposure. Soldiers were subjected to constant bombardment and the fear of sudden attacks, leading to extreme anxiety and emotional exhaustion. The psychological toll of watching comrades die, living in unhygienic conditions, and enduring sleepless nights contributed to mental breakdowns. Common symptoms, physical symptoms: tremors, paralysis, loss of speech, headaches, and extreme fatigue. Cognitive symptoms, memory loss, confusion, and inability to concentrate. Emotional symptoms, anxiety, depression, nightmares, and emotional numbness. Medical and military responses. Initially, military leaders and doctors struggled to understand and treat shell shock. Some dismissed it as cowardice, while others sought medical explanations, early misconceptions, and stigma at the beginning of the war. Shell shock was often misunderstood. Many soldiers were accused of mingering or lacking discipline, leading to harsh punishments or even execution. In extreme cases, advances in psychological treatment. As cases of shell shock increased, medical professionals began to recognize it as a legitimate medical condition. Treatment evolved from punishment to rehabilitation, with doctors implementing rest and recuperation, removing soldiers from the front lines to reduce stress. Hypnotherapy and talking therapies, encouraging soldiers to discuss their experiences to alleviate psychological distress. Occupational therapy, engaging soldiers in manual tasks to aid recovery. The impact on mental health. Understanding World War I marked a turning point in the study and treatment of psychological trauma, influencing future approaches to mental health. The development of military psychiatry, the need to treat shell shock, led to the establishment of dedicated psychiatric hospitals and the expansion of mental health services in the military. It also influenced later studies on PTSD in subsequent wars. The shift in public perception, the experiences of World War I veterans, helped shift attitudes toward mental illness, leading to greater recognition of combat-related psychological trauma in both military and civilian life, long-term effects, and legacy. The psychological impact of World War I extended far beyond the battlefield, affecting veterans for the rest of their lives. Post-war struggles. Many soldiers suffered from long-term mental health issues, struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. Some experienced persistent anxiety, depression, and difficulty maintaining relationships and employment. Influence on modern psychiatry. The study of shell shock paved the way for modern PTSD research, and treatment lessons learned from World War I were later applied in World War II and beyond. Shaping contemporary approaches to trauma therapy, the psychological effects of World War I were profound, with shell shock highlighting the deep mental scars left by warfare. While the initial response to the condition was often misguided, the war ultimately contributed to advancements in mental health treatment, and a better understanding of combat-related trauma. The legacy of shell shock continues to inform modern psychiatry, emphasizing the importance of addressing the psychological well-being of soldiers and civilians affected by conflict. World War I was not only a conflict fought by humans, but also one in which animals played a vital role. Horses, dogs, pigeons, camels, and even elephants were used in various capacities, from transportation and communication to morale boosting and medical assistance. These animals faced extreme hardships and often displayed remarkable bravery alongside the soldiers they served. This part explores the essential roles animals played in World War I, their contributions, and the long-term impact of their involvement in military operations, horses and mules. The backbone of transportation before the widespread use of mechanized vehicles. Horses and mules were essential for transportation, logistics, and cavalry operations, carrying supplies and equipment. Horses and mules transported ammunition, medical supplies, and food across difficult terrain. They were used extensively in supply chains to ensure that soldiers at the front lines had the necessary resources to sustain combat cavalry units in battle. At the beginning of the war, cavalry units were still considered a major force in battle. However, as trench warfare became the dominant strategy, the effectiveness of cavalry diminished. Nonetheless, horses remained crucial for reconnaissance missions and rapid troop movements, the harsh conditions they faced. Horses suffered immensely in World War I, often enduring extreme weather. Poor nutrition and injuries from artillery and gas attacks, disease and exhaustion claimed the lives of millions of horses, leading to the mass importation of replacements, particularly from the United States and Canada. Those messengers, guardians, and companions served in various military roles, from carrying messages to detecting enemies and comforting soldiers. In distress, messenger dogs. Trench warfare required reliable communication, and dogs were used to carry messages across dangerous battlefields where human runners would have been too exposed. Their agility and speed made them valuable assets in delivering vital messages. Sentry and guard dogs. Many military units employed dogs to guard trenches and detect enemy presence. Their acute senses allowed them to alert soldiers to incoming threats, including enemy soldiers and gas attacks. Therapy and morale. Boosting dogs. Dogs provided emotional support to soldiers who faced the horrors of war. Their presence in the trenches helped alleviate stress and anxiety, offering comfort to troops enduring prolonged battles. Pigeons, aerial messengers. Pigeons played a crucial role in communication, ensuring messages reached commanders. Even in the most challenging conditions, the use of homing pigeons. Homing pigeons were trained to carry messages from the front lines back to command centers. Their reliability in reaching their destinations made them indispensable for military communication. Notable pigeons of World War I. One of the most famous pigeons was Cher Ami, a pigeon used by the U.S. Army Signal Corps in 1918. Cher Ami delivered a crew crawl message that saved nearly 200 soldiers despite being wounded in action for this act of bravery. The pigeon was awarded military honors, camels, elephants, and other unusual animal contributions. Beyond horses and dogs, other animals played significant roles in World War I. Particularly in regions with harsh environmental conditions, Yemenis in the Middle East and desert warfare, particularly in the Sinai and Palestine campaigns, camels were used for transport and recon. Their ability to endure extreme heat and travel long distances without water made them ideal for military operations. In these regions, elephants in logistical support in some theaters of war. Particularly in British and Indian military campaigns, elephants were employed for heavy lifting, moving supplies, and even pulling artillery in rugged terrain. The impact and legacy of animals in World War I. Animals not only played crucial wartime roles, but also left a lasting legacy. In military history, recognition, and memorials, many nations have recognized the contributions of animals in war. Through memorials and awards, the Dickin Medal, introduced in 1943, honored Animals for bravery and military service, with several World War I animals, Polly receiving recognition, the evolution of animal use and warfare, while mechanization reduced the reliance on animals. In later wars, their role in World War I influenced military strategies, particularly in logistics and communication. Today, military working dogs and other service animals continue to serve in modern armed forces. The role of animals in World War I was both vital and tragic. From horses and mules transporting supplies to dogs and pigeons, delivering messages, these animals contributed significantly to the war effort. Despite their immense hardships, their loyalty, bravery, and resilience proved invaluable to soldiers on the battlefield. Recognizing their contributions helps us appreciate the sacrifices made by both humans and animals during one of history's deadliest conflicts. World War I was not only fought on the battlefields, but also had a profound effect on civilian populations worldwide. The war disrupted economies, displaced millions, and altered daily life in unprecedented ways. Civilians endured food shortages, bombings, forced migrations, and government-imposed restrictions. This part explores the impact of World War I on civilian populations, examining economic hardship, societal changes, civilian casualties, and the long-term consequences of the war. Economic hardship and resource shortages. The war drained national economies, leading to widespread economic struggles and resource shortages. Rationing and food scarcity. Governments introduced food rationing to ensure that military forces were supplied first. Civilians often faced severe shortages of basic goods, such as bread, meat, and fuel in countries like Britain and Germany. The war effort led to strict rationing policies that altered diets and living standards. Industrial and labor shifts, with millions of men enlisted in the military. Labor shortages in factories and farms became a pressing issue. Many women entered the workforce in industries such as munitions production, textile manufacturing, and agriculture, leading to shifts in traditional gender roles. Civilian casualties and bombing campaigns. While the majority of casualties in World War I were military personnel, civilians also suffered immensely from direct and indirect violence. Air raids and bombings. Technological advancements in aerial warfare led to the bombing of civilian areas, German Zeppelin raids on British cities, and artillery attacks on towns near the front lines caused significant civilian casualties and destruction, disease, and malnutrition. Weakened by war-rated famine and poor living conditions, civilians faced outbreaks of disease. The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which spread partly due to wartime conditions, claimed millions of lives globally. Forced displacement and refugee crises, millions of civilians were displaced as a result of military operations, territorial changes, and persecution. Refugees in Europe, entire populations fled, advancing. Armies, particularly in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. The war created one of the first large-scale refugee crises of the 20th century: persecution and ethnic cleansing. Certain ethnic groups, such as Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, suffered from mass persecution, forced marches, and genocidal policies. The war intensified ethnic and national tensions, leading to mass atrocities, government control, and propaganda to maintain support for the war governments. Implemented strict control over civilian life through propaganda censorship and mandatory service propaganda and nationalism. Governments used propaganda to rally support for the war, encouraging enlistment and home front sacrifices. Posters, newspapers, and films depicted enemy forces as villains and glorified national military efforts, conscription, and civil liberties. Many nations introduced mandatory military service, drafting men into the armed forces. Civil liberties were often restricted, with governments imposing censorship on anti-war sentiments and suppressing dissent. The long-term consequences on civilian life. The war permanently altered civilian life and had lasting effects on societies worldwide. Social changes and women's rights, women's contributions to the workforce during the war. led to greater calls for gender equality. Many countries, including Britain and the United States, granted women the right to vote in the post-war years. Economic and political instability, the economic devastation of the war, contributed to inflation, debt, and social unrest. Many European nations faced political upheaval, leading to revolutions, the collapse of monarchies, and the rise of new political ideologies such as communism and fascism. World War I reshaped civilian life in profound ways, leading to economic struggles, social upheaval, and political transformations. Civilians faced hardships such as food shortages, bombings, and displacement, while also experiencing changes that shaped modern societies. The war's impact extended far beyond the battlefield, leaving a lasting legacy that influenced global history for decades to come. World War I was a truly global conflict involving not just European nations, but also millions of soldiers from Africa and Asia. Colonial troops played a crucial role in supporting the war effort, providing manpower, logistical support, and combat units on multiple fronts, despite their immense contributions. These soldiers often faced discrimination, poor conditions, and limited recognition. This part explores the role of African and Asian soldiers in World War I, examining their recruitment contributions, challenges, and the lasting impact of their service. Recruitment and mobilization of colonial troops. Many European colonial powers relied on their colonies to provide soldiers for the war effort, recruiting both volunteers and conscripts. British and French colonial forces, British Empire. The British recruited troops from India, Africa, and the Caribbean. The Indian Army provided over 1 million soldiers, many of whom fought on the Western Front, the Middle East, and East Africa. French Empire, France, relied on troops from North and West Africa, Indochina, and Madagascar. The Tiers Seal were one of the most notable units fighting in Europe. And the Middle East forced conscription and resistance. In many cases, colonial soldiers were forcibly conscripted or pressured to enlist. This led to resistance in some regions, particularly in parts of Africa, where local populations resented European interference in their communities. Contributions of African and Asian soldiers. Colonial troops were involved in various roles, from frontline combat to vital logistical support, combat roles. Many African and Asian soldiers fought in key battles alongside European troops. Indian soldiers played a critical role in battles such as Ara and Gallipoli, while African soldiers served in campaigns across East Africa and the Western Front. Logistical and support roles, in addition to fighting, many colonial troops worked as laborers, porters, and engineers. They transported supplies, built roads and railways, and carried wounded soldiers from battlefields, ensuring the smooth operation of military campaigns. Challenges and discrimination despite their contributions. African and Asian soldiers faced numerous hardships during and after the war. Poor living conditions. Colonial troops were often subjected to inadequate living conditions, receiving lower quality food. Medical care and equipment compared to their European counterparts. Racial discrimination and unequal treatment. Many colonial soldiers faced discrimination from European officers. And soldiers, they were often assigned to the most dangerous and physically demanding tasks, and their sacrifices were frequently overlooked in post-war commemorations, post-war impact, and legacy. The participation of African and Asian soldiers in World War I had long-term effects on colonial societies and their relationships with European powers. Nationalism and calls for independence. The war experience fueled nationalist movements in many colonies. Soldiers who had fought for European powers began demanding greater rights and self-determination, contributing to independence movements in India, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Lack of recognition despite their sacrifices. Many colonial soldiers were denied the same rights and benefits as European veterans. Their contributions were largely forgotten or minimized in history. Historical narratives, though, efforts have been made in recent years to acknowledge their role. African and Asian soldiers played a vital role in World War I, contributing significantly to the war effort. Despite facing discrimination and hardships, their involvement not only shaped the course of the war, but also influenced the political landscape of the 20th century, inspiring movements for independence and equal rights. Recognizing their contributions helps provide a more complete understanding of World War I as a truly global conflict. World War I was not only a conflict of military engagements, but also a period of intense diplomatic maneuvering. While the war was largely defined by brutal combat efforts to negotiate peace and maintain alliances played a crucial role in shaping its course and eventual conclusion. Diplomacy was instrumental in forming military coalitions, brokering ceasefires, and laying the groundwork for post-war reconstruction. This part explores the diplomatic effort during World War I, analyzing key peace initiatives, the role of neutral nations, and the eventual treaties that shaped the post-war world, pre-war alliances, and diplomatic failures. The diplomatic landscape before the outbreak of World War I was characterized by a complex system of alliances that ultimately contributed to the war's escalation. The alliance system Triple Entente, comprising France, Britain, and Russia. This alliance aimed to counterbalance the growing power of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. This coalition sought to deter aggression from the Entente powers. These alliances meant to provide security, instead created a domino effect where local conflicts escalated into a full-scale war. Due to mutual defense obligations, failed diplomatic attempts to prevent war. Before the war, diplomatic attempts to resolve tensions, including the Hague Convention and various bilateral negotiations, failed to prevent hostilities. Nationalist sentiments, imperial ambitions, and military planning often overshadow diplomatic efforts, wartime diplomacy, and peace efforts. Despite the ongoing conflict, numerous attempts were made to negotiate peace or mitigate the war's destruction. The role of neutral nations, neutral countries such as Switzerland, Sweden, and the United States, attempted to mediate peace negotiations between the warring nations. The Vatican also played a role in advocating for a ceasefire and humanitarian efforts, secret peace talks, and failed negotiations. The 1916 peace initiatives efforts like to the German Chancellor Bethmann H.W. Secret peace overtures and Pope Benedict XV's proposals failed due to distrust and rigid war. Aims the Stockholm Conference, 1917, socialist and pacifist groups attempted to hold peace talks in Sweden. But these efforts collapsed as governments remained committed to victory through military means. The end of the war, diplomatic agreements, and the Treaty of Versailles as the war reached its final stages. Diplomatic efforts intensified to shape the post-war order. The Armistice of 1918, on November 11, 1918. An armistice was signed between Germany and the Allied powers, effectively ending World War I. The agreement negotiated in Caen, France, imposed severe conditions on Germany, leading to the eventual Treaty of Versailles, the Paris Peace Conference. And the Treaty of Versailles, the Paris Peace Conference, held in 1919, brought together world leaders to determine the future of Europe. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, imposed strict penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, disarmament, and heavy reparations. The long-term impact of diplomacy and World War I. The diplomatic efforts during and after the war had profound and lasting effects on international relations. The League of Nations, one of the most significant outcomes of the post-war diplomatic process, was the creation of the League of Nations, designed to prevent future conflicts through collective security and arbitration. However, the League faced challenges due to the absence of key nations like the United States and its inability to enforce decisions effectively unresolved. Solved conflicts and the road to World War II. While diplomatic agreements ended World War I, many of the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles contributed to resentment and instability in Europe. Setting the stage for World War II, diplomacy played a crucial role in World War I, from pre-war alliances to wartime peace efforts and post-war treaties. While many diplomatic initiatives failed to prevent or quickly end the war, they shaped the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. The lessons learned from these diplomatic efforts influenced future international relations and highlighted the importance of negotiation in global conflicts. World War I marked a turning point in military history as it saw the introduction of advanced weaponry and new tactics that changed the nature of warfare. The war began with 19th century strategies, but quickly evolved into a brutal conflict driven by modern industrialized weapons. This part explores the evolution of weapons and warfare during World War I, highlighting the impact of machine guns, artillery, chemical weapons, tanks, aircraft, and submarines. The role of machine guns in infantry combat. Machine guns revolutionized battlefield combat, making traditional frontal assaults nearly impossible. The introduction of automatic firepower, machine guns such as the Maxim gun, Weisser machine gun, and MG-08 had a devastating effect on infantry assaults capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. These weapons turned battlefields into killing zones, leading to high casualty rates. The shift to trench warfare, the effectiveness of machine guns, forced armies to adopt trench warfare, where soldiers dug elaborate defensive positions to protect themselves from relentless enemy fire. This resulted in prolonged battles and stalemates, as seen in conflicts like the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun. The devastation of artillery and explosive warfare artillery became the deadliest weapon of the war, responsible for the majority of casualties. Heavy artillery barges, massive guns such as Big Barra used by Germany and the British 15-inch howitzer, could fire explosive shells over long distances, decimating enemy trenches and fortifications. The introduction of creeping barges allowed for coordinated attacks, though they often led to devastating friendly fire incidents. The Psychological and Physical Impact Act prolonged artillery bombardments not only caused widespread destruction, but also led to psychological trauma, with many soldiers suffering from shell shock, now recognized as PTSD. The emergence of chemical warfare. World War I was the first major conflict to see the widespread use of chemical weapons, poison gas. As a new weapon, chlorine gas was first used by Germany at the Second Battle of Arras in 1915, causing mass panic and suffocation. F-gene gas, a deadlier variant, was introduced soon after, leading to prolonged and fatal effects. Mustard gas, one of the most infamous chemical agents, caused severe burns, blindness, and respiratory damage lingering on battlefields for days. Countermeasures and ethical controversies. Gas masks became a necessity for soldiers, but chemical warfare remained controversial, leading to its eventual ban under the Geneva Protocol of 1925. The introduction of tanks and armored vehicles. Tanks were introduced to break the deadlock of trench warfare and provide mobile firepower. Early tank designs and challenges. The Mark I tank, first deployed by Britain in 1916 at the Battle of the Somme, demonstrated the potential of armored warfare. However, early tanks were slow, unreliable, and vulnerable to mechanical failure. The evolution of tank warfare by 1918 improved models such as the Renault FT in France and the Whippet medium tank in Britain, increased mobility and effectiveness, paving the way for the future use of armored divisions. In warfare, the role of aircraft and aerial combat. Aviation saw significant advancements during World War I, evolving from reconnaissance missions to aerial combat. The role of aircraft in warfare. At the start of the war, planes were primarily used for reconnaissance, helping direct artillery fire and scout enemy positions as technology improved. Aircraft were equipped with machine guns, leading to the emergence of fighter pilots and aerial dogfights. Notable fighter aces and developments. Manfred von Arhofen, the Red Baron, became Germany's most famous ace, with 80 confirmed kills. Eddie Rickenbacker, the top American ace, demonstrated the growing importance of aerial superiority, naval warfare, and the impact of submarines. Naval combat played a critical role in the war, particularly with the use of submarines and blockades. The use of U-boats, Germany's U-boat submarine campaign, targeted Allied shipping, sinking thousands of vessels, including the Lusitania in 1915. Unrestricted submarine warfare eventually contributed to the U.S. entering the war. The development of anti-submarine warfare to counter the submarine threat the Allies implemented. Convoy systems, depth charges, and sonar technology. Improving naval defense strategies, the lasting impact on modern warfare. The technological innovations of World War I laid the foundation for future military strategies. Advancements in weaponry. The lessons learned from World War I influenced weapons development in World War II, particularly in tank and aircraft design, changes in military tactics.